VenomousStare back with another retro Starcraft game. This time we have another classic from the boys in the media clan. Spawning in the top left, the late great Jeff Incontrol Robinson. Probably the most funny guy in the entire Starcraft 2 scene. And an absolute paragon, and a man that just brought everybody up through his entire team in the scene. He plays a aggressive ground-based Zerg approach in most of his games. Favors this ground and pound Hydra Lurker based style called Man Zerg. Not really a fan of going Spire. He doesn't really like to micro mutas, it's not one of his strengths. He likes to go for an aggressive ground control approach, usually into a faster Ultra. Likes to go Ultraling, not necessarily a guy who uses Defilers a lot or likes to play that massive like Defiler style. More of an aggressive, faster into Ultra style. His opponent, and I'm going to collapse the scoreboard here because it's about the size of the green monster. I'll make sure to bring it up when it's relevant. My personal favorite player ever, the methodical macro machine, Greg IdrA Fields. They're playing on Andromeda, the map that was featured last time on the Venomous Classic series, and a very good game you should check out. It was similar, it was a TVZ just like this game, and it was Incontrol on Andromeda against a methodical media macro Terran, but it was Artosis, not IdrA. So IdrA's going to grab his barracks here to start things off. Incontrol has taken a hatchery down at his natural, and Andromeda's weird because it seems like it would be a really macro focused map because you have an in-base expansion here, which is mineral only, a pocket base. And then you have a very easy to defend natural third base with the gas. But this big cliff over here is blocked off by these power generators, which have 800 HP, and these are basically just like destructible rocks. But we saw in the last game I casted, Dan Artosis used tank drop to phenomenal effectiveness, consistently dropping Incontrol and erasing Overlords and Scourge on these high grounds with his Valkyries. And Incontrol was unable to hold his exterior bases because of the tank drops. So it will be interesting to see if the game gets to that point, and if so, if Incontrol adjusts. Because Artosis really perfectly showed how to abuse Andromeda. This is a guy who isn't really known for being abusive or doing a bunch of map-specific stuff, but Artosis did a phenomenal job of getting in the face of the Zerg opponent and never letting them have those side bases, and playing the map specifically and not just doing like a standard build. Because what Artosis did last game was he went for Valkyrie tank, used the Valkyries to get air control, kill all the Overlords, kill Scourge, and then when he did the tank drop, because of the generators being up, it was very hard for Incontrol to do a retake because it's hard to attack into Valkyries with mutas. IdrA getting Marines out, parking him at the top of his ramp, and of course he's getting a command center. He'll float that down as soon as it's done. Incontrol getting a lair, and he's getting a base at his in-base pocket, mineral only as well. Notice he's getting his lair at his natural. This is something that we saw like in the Wings of Liberty beta that then like never really transferred out of that. And the thought process here is like, well, the entire game is going to hedge on this lair and attacking the lair. So I'm going to make it a lair because it has a little bit more health than a hatchery, and if I die with this base, I'm going to lose the game anyway. So remember, on almost every map you're going to see Zergs make a plethora of sunken colonies at the front door of their natural, and that's why Incontrol elected to take this base first, as opposed to this one, which you might be saying, well, this one is easier to defend because it has a high ground. Well, Zerg wants to be able to get the creep out here in a way where they can really make a wall in with the Sunkens. But the early Wings of Liberty StarCraft 2 maps are so rush-centric and bad that the thought process was, well, you're going to get rushed and they're going to attack your natural, so you make that structure a layer as opposed to your main because you need the extra HP to hold off the rush. Like, that's how rush-centric early Wings of Liberty was. IdrA is kicking away here with SCVs at his natural, and notice Incontrol has a Overlord right on this little high ground. This is exactly what you want to do if you're Zerg. You want to park Overlords right on the corner of these high grounds over the Terran's natural. StarCraft 2, they have a lot more of these. They have a lot more little like weird Overlord pillars designed strictly for overlords that can't be really used for anything else. They're not big enough to drop stuff on. Brood War, there's way more high grounds, just big freaking high grounds that you can drop a bunch of tanks on. For those who have been following the channel for a long time, you know that I like the map Lost Temple, which was a Brood War map, but then a map that was in the beginning of Starcraft 2 that was ported over, and a map that got a lot of play even early on in Starcraft 2, like in tournaments, like in GSL even, which is crazy. And the key factor of Lost Temple is there's a big high ground above the natural that Terrans would always drop tanks on. And there's high grounds above naturals and mains on this game a lot. It's not necessarily as big of a deal. And if you look at from the point that Brood War came out in 99 all the way up until like 05, 06, a lot of the maps were still very crazy in terms of abuse of high grounds, close rush distances. It was a lot more like early Wings of Liberty as far as the ability to abuse and the off-the-wallness of the maps and really how bad they would be for Zerg. Because Terran and Protoss, they can punch with a lot of the map weirdness, but Zerg is more rigid in terms of like, okay, well Zerg just has to be able to make sunkens at their natural to be able to defend like a lot of the stuff in the early game, like 2-gate pressure, early marine pressure. And that's why Incontrol took the space first and made it a lair. And that's why there's that weird little creep on Colosseum, which is a map that's structured very similarly to this one, except your main is here in Colosseum. But basically the point being is like Zerg has to be able to build sunkens out here at the mouth of their natural to defend. And a lot of that was not really known in the early game, the early days of Brood War, like early. Like back when the Korean players would wear like the astronaut uniforms to the Pro League matches. And I mean, we're talking no one really even knew what was going on days, and like Gur was the best foreigner player in like the Mondragon era. Like there is a distinct difference between Brood War from 2000 to 2000 and say like 3, and then like 2004 to 2006. And then this era, which is like 07 to 2010, which this era, 07 to 2010 that we're watching now, this game taking place in 08, is way closer to the modern Brood War that we see, and the skill level in metagame was way more similar to what we see now, as Incontrol is establishing these left side bases. This is very standard for Zerg, because what you see oftentimes from Zerg is they won't take the third base right here that can be pushed simultaneously as their natural. They want Terran to make a decision. Okay, well crap, their natural has 5+ sunkens at it and he's going to have lurkers there and there's double high ground. Even though I have to walk all the way across the map, there's probably going to be less defense at these bottom side bases. And remember, the reason Zerg doesn't take these bases is they can just be attacked simultaneously, the natural and the third. Remember, Terran will just put tanks here. Zerg wants to put Terran in a position where they either have to split their army, which favors Zerg, or do a big extended push all the way across the map, in which case it's easy to like attack the retreat path or the reinforcement path, put like lurkers in the reinforcement path, lings in the reinforcement path, pick it off with mutas. Or if they're attacking up here, you know that this left side is going to be safe, and you're even able to go down here and take the bottom side like this. But IdrA is going for an extended bio play, lots of racks, and double starport with control tower, which of course means he's going for vessel. If you did not see the irradiate being researched, double vessel. So this is a common thing. This is called SK Terran, where the Terran goes for a massive amount of upgraded bio, almost all medic marine, a couple firebats, just to keep the Zerg honest. Firebat's almost a thing you make to be cute, really. It's not that good. And then what you do is you go double vessel, and this is one of the hardest things to do in all of Brood War. It takes some of the highest APM, it's some of the most difficult to control, it's some of the most difficult to macro, and it's very, very difficult to play SK Terran and get all this bio churning out and move all these control groups of bio vessel, and especially once the Zerg gets ultras and when the Zerg gets swarm, it's just so hard because you're having to attack with so many units. And remember, the control groups are highly limited in Brood War. You have to attack 1A, 2A, 3A, 4. it's just very difficult to move your army from point A to point B. As IdrA loses a vessel there, is in control, intelligently had a Scourge right above his lurkers. This is so common. The Terran player waits until they have a vessel to push out. Why is that? Because the vessel is incredibly powerful. It has a spell called Irradiate that does massive AoE. And you see it right there, and the AoE is brutal, especially against mutas, but the vessel is also a detector. It allows the Terran to see burrowed lurkers. As it stands, IdrA is able to see the lurkers, and he has to be very wary of the Scourge. The Zerg player will try to fly the Scourge in and kill the vessel, because the vessel is really the crux of the issue here when you play SK Terran. If you're not going to go tanks, you really lack splash damage. The SK Terran style does not employ tanks. They go fast double vessel. You don't have the tank, you don't have the gas to also get tanks. And IdrA is going to be aggressed upon here by Incontrol. Lurkers screaming forward here. IdrA loses his vessel, but knew he was going to lose the vessel and did a scan there. Killed about half the lurkers. But this is brutal because it's a lot of medic here left for the Kraken. And IdrA is going to try to retreat. He knows that he needs more vessel and more marines to really punch this out, and he knows that Incontrol has taken these bottom bases. Even back in 08, this was standard, where Zerg was going to expand into one of the mains, and he sort of knew that the natural was going to be sunkened up, so you would try to pressure and really make your stand down at that bottom base, whether they would take it bottom left or in the other opposite natural, in the other main, which would be here. And a lot of times what we would see in this matchup would be that even if the players were macro players and they were trying to go for a safe, intelligent approach, what would happen would be, as we see Ultras come out here for Incontrol. Notice he also has a Defiler nest and he's getting Ultra speed. Incontrol loved to use the Ultra. Whenever he first downloaded the Brood War beta, he teched right up into Ultra off of 5 drones and was just fascinated by it as a child. And make no mistake, the Ultra is like a get in there and get shit done unit. It's very powerful. But IdrA knew that the game would revolve around this time when he would get his vessels and he would have to punch out a base. And he's going to use Defensive Matrix on some of his units and then stem them forward and try to draw the lurker shots out. And Incontrol is trying to stymie off the Kraken here. And the Kraken with a few vessels is going to try to attack, but once he sees the Ultras, he's going to leave. Because he's going to say to himself, oh crap, if he has Ultras and I haven't killed anything yet, I'm not going to be able to win, so let's just jump that one back a little bit. As what's going on here is Incontrol has established these fast 3 bases, okay, and IdrA's sort of saying, okay, a bunch of lurkers are out here, and he knows Sunkens are out here, and he knows the Zerg is going to be producing out of all these hatches, and he's going to have defender's advantage, so he says, okay, I'm going to attack the exterior base, which, like I said, happens all the time and is like a very standard decision. So as it stands for Incontrol, what he's trying to do is move his lurkers out from up here to down here to defend these bottom bases, because what Incontrol's trying to do is it's this against the clock game as Zerg, where you're trying to tech into Defiler and Ultra in the late game against both Protoss and Terran. And you really have 2 power spikes when you're Zerg. If you go Mutalist, you have that power spike when you go Muta, and you can harass the Terran and hopefully kill some workers before they have turrets up and snowball. And then you have the Defiler power spike. And here's the big engagement where IdrA is trying to move southbound, and there's this oh shit moment where when a big control group of lurkers unburrows and then runs at you with a bunch of lings. And as Terran, you're saying to yourself, well, I have this big army, but he has so many lurkers where it's just going to like one-shot my stuff. So you stem and try to fight, but you know you can't sit there and fight in all those lurkers, so oftentimes you'll scan, do a big volley, and then run away and not stand in the lurkers. And as I said before, the science vessels are really the heart and soul of this push. And we can see IdrA's producing them, and then he's trying to get a dropship tube so he can ferry up onto this high ground. I love maps where there's a legitimate high ground advantage and the high ground is part of the map, but it's not the end-all be-all. That was the problem with Lost Temple, is the high ground was everything in that map. It was from like minute 3 on, it was the everything, and that was because on Lost Temple there were no generators that you could break. It was just its own little high ground with nothing to access it. But we saw in IdrA vs Stork, a game that I casted a couple weeks ago, that even though IdrA is a methodical macro player and is always trying to play for the late game, and he doesn't like to do cheeses or rushes or attacks, there comes a point where even if you're a macro player where you get to the point in your build where you have to make something happen. he knows that Incontrol has these bottom bases and is teching up into Hive rapidly, and he's trying to crush down and pop these bases before Incontrol gets into Hive. And you might be saying, well, why did he leave so fast? If you're unfamiliar with IdrA, he's famous for leaving very quickly, but because Ultras were out, that's basically what IdrA was fighting against. He's saying, I've got to get down here and punch this third out before the Ultras are hatched. So whenever he's not even down into attacking the bases yet and he sees the Ultra, he knows that he's fucked. Because he knows more Ultras are coming, he knows all these bases are alive and kicking, he knows Incontrol has these bases droned too, and he knows that he doesn't have a fourth. So it's like 5 bases to 3. I don't even think he has... Remember how like late this third was too, and this is a no gas base. And Incontrol can of course take this one if he wants. Whenever you play SK Terran and you run it on the map to sort of get your first big push done and you lose everything without killing any bases or any workers, it's like, well, okay, how far along is the Zerg? Well, okay, it was already into Ultra Defiler. Well, I'm fucked then. Because then as soon as this engagement ends, Incontrol makes Ultraling Defiler, masses up here, and then IdrA's like, okay, I guess I'll start my fourth. Defilers run up here, swarm, and the Kraken's done. So it wasn't an early leave at all. And Incontrol just did a great job getting his economy up, maintaining map control. Notice he has overlords in all the right places to see drops. And in this map, he went for way more Scourge and was more Scourge heavy. And this prevented IdrA from doing any high ground abuse. Whereas in the Andromeda game, we saw Artosis versus Incontrol, the last video on the channel. Incontrol didn't get Scourges early enough, and it really made it where he lost high ground advantage, and that sort of snowballs on you. In almost every matchup, whether it be versus carriers as Terran or versus carriers as Zerg, it's like, man, if you lose air dominance, if they have a lot of air units and you just can't get any air units up, it's hard to come back in that regard. And that's what happened to Jeff last game against Artosis is, okay, he was losing these fights on these high grounds, and then what ended up happening is that because the Valk count was so high, he could never really get control of the high grounds back. Notice IdrA turreted up the high grounds, very intelligent, crisp macro play there. And IdrA did great in this game. Like, he didn't get supply blocked, he didn't play sloppy, but it was like that game versus Stork where he doesn't want to attack and be aggressive early, but once you like get that 2-1, you get that 3 base income, you do have to attack at some point. Even if you're a methodical macro player and you always are trying to play for the defensive advantages, at some point you have to make your stand and do a big attack and punch out a base and use your macro advantage. And IdrA tried to do that here, but Incontrol moved down with Scourge, moved down with Lurkers, and it stalled IdrA around enough and screwed him around enough where essentially when IdrA finally was like, okay, here's my big army, I'm going to finally push, I have vessel energy, more than one vessel, here comes the Ultras. And IdrA knows, like, literally as soon as he sees one Ultra, yo, yeah, I'm fucked. I'm just dead. It's the classic IdrA GG timing though. He wastes no time, and a huge swarm of Ultraling was flooding there to the natural, so it was over. If you enjoyed that, sub for more. I have more media games on the way.